heroes of today, Amaka and Cephas. I welcome you to Privacy Quest Village, and thank you for being part of this creative, weird experiment to celebrate Data Privacy Day and bring the community together around privacy. So, really glad that you are here. And without further ado, I just want to give the stage to you and please introduce yourselves. How did you end up in privacy, and how was the journey so far? So, Amaka, can we start with you?
Awesome. Thanks, Mert, for having me here to have this conversation. I know there's been insightful conversation, prior to today's conversation, and there will be more after today's conversation. To your question about my journey to privacy, it's one that has evolved over time. I always say, I started my career as a developer at the time. You would very well call it, a software engineer developing enterprise type applications, but because doing this can be painstakingly hard, albeit fun, um, it flashed on my radar that cyber criminals are out there, and I began to question myself. How can I spend this investment of time to build applications, and someone sitting miles away can bypass my applications, or wreak havoc to the users that we intend to serve? Because at the core of software development is to optimize business processes, at least in my mind at the time. And so that was something that took me on a journey into cybersecurity. And I always said then my journey to cybersecurity was for me to uncover the tricks, the tools, and the mindset of cyber criminals, so that when I design my application, I will design it in a very robust manner. And jokingly, over a decade, I haven't made my way back, but I think I have evolved from cybersecurity to also think about privacy, because when we think about the fortress and securing where the data that we collect lives, the second question begins to come where we start looking at humanizing the data that we collect, because every single data from individuals means a lot to them, and context can be very powerful. So that's been my journey from software development into cybersecurity, and now privacy. One other thing I will caveat, because it might be some foundational we would relate to it as we talk today, is when I made my way into cybersecurity, of course, my passion was really to understand, how hackers work. And my first role in cybersecurity was really as an ethical hacker, a penetration tester. So that mindset will bring to bear, I always call it the adversarial mindset. So we'll talk about that as we build products, even from a privacy point of view.
And congratulations on your podcast as well, because when the previous conversation was happening, you mentioned the podcast, and I asked you how about threat modeling, and you said Kim was actually your first guest, and
Yes.
thankfully we had Kim Whites with us last week, and we did this walkthrough of the quest we collaborated on, and I think it's a great kickoff for a podcast. And congratulations! I'll be
Thank you.
share the link in the
Mhm.
chat. And thank you, Amaka. And Cephas, welcome. And I really enjoy being in this session with you, because since the first days of Privacy Quest, Cephas was there, and he was always included and in the community active. So Cephas, thank you so much that I had the chance to meet with Amaka, all thanks to you, and making this session a reality. So can we please hear your story as well? Because you're doing amazing things with Cyber Africa, etc. And I would love to, give a shout out to them as well.
Interesting, hard act to follow, definitely, from Amaka there. So I will be modest as much as I can. But yeah, I studied cybersecurity in school, lucky enough. So went through some undergrad in security, computer security, as it was called. Then thereafter, I, of course, started doing some security operations, albeit at that time it wasn't really formed area in our ecosystem. But did a bit of that. Being the business person as I am, I pivot into much of business development, a bit of cyber marketing. Again, just experimenting as you are with this Privacy Quest venture. Did that for a bit. Now that's when came Cyber in Africa, a few other brands that me and my gang have sort of put into market. So of course, then I sort of pivoted back into cloud. Did a short stint in cloud security, particularly AWS. Didn't last long there, and then I was attracted to this privacy. But again, I think along the way, of course,
Cephas, I can't hear you, but maybe only I had the problem. But yeah, no.
Okay. How's that now?
For me, oh, it's better.
Okay, good. So yeah, I've been championing cybersecurity and privacy within the African context for a while now. I think 5, 6, 7 years now. Through different community engagements, different projects, programs, etc. So of course, part of that privacy has naturally come up a lot. Participated in different privacy-related projects, albeit much of it back in the day was more policy work and advocacy, because again, we didn't have the legal regimes and regulations. But again, that formed the basis of the industry as is right now. So,
and from this point, I was curious about this in our morning call as well, the previous call.
yes.
As well. Where do you see the African, where's the directions heading with regard to its cybersecurity regulations, privacy regulations? Is it more like a data localization approach, or more relaxed? And what's the overall take over there with regard to your experiences and the projects you're involved with?
Yeah, I think you ask a very important question, and also to piggyback off of what Cephas has mentioned. He talks about where privacy is on the continent, meaning Africa. We should also know that Africa is, contains 54 countries, and they all operate, very differently. But with regards to data, it's in its early stage, and I'm a firm believer of, approaching things from the foundation, from the fundamentals, as we begin to generate this large amount of data in Africa, because we also need to begin to design. And we know that most times design engineering follows the legal and regulatory work. So it's good that we are having this conversation. And so I think there's going to be ample influence that we could also project on the continent as we think about it, because we've got to be innovative. However, to your question around shifting privacy left, which is near and dear to my heart, it also goes back to privacy by design principles. And when we look at privacy by design principles, let's take, for example, within an organization, I always think about it that we all do, like you mentioned, you had talked to him earlier on, we all do threat modeling. So the question is, how are we doing it? How are we defining the questions that we ask? How are we looking at the richness of how we challenge the systems that we build, the processes that we build? And so just to set the stage here is, with regards to shifting left, we have to think about it. Most organizations that develop applications, that develop this product, you mentioned AI, and of course we know that there are subtle differences between the traditional application and the AI application, and it also comes with increased level of risk, and same with the benefits that comes along with it. One of the ways that I like to think about it is, most organizations, they have a review process where it sort of gets products before they go out there, before it gets launched. a way to also think about it is if you're only getting to review the product before release, you're losing, a critical mass of the amount of influence that you could make in baking privacy into the products that you're designing. And so what we think about is privacy by design consultation. How can we operationalize that within the organization? How can we get to a point where our business partners, at the point when they are conceptualizing the ideas, they're also thinking about privacy. They're thinking about privacy engineers. They're calling us and they're having the conversations with us. When we want to go into partnership with other organizations, we shouldn't be seeing the contract. We should be involved in those early conversations, especially when it's a data collaboration. So shifting privacy left or talk about early engagement means, one, we've got to be proactive. We've got to understand the direction of the organization. And to do this, in my email signature, I always say, consult early, consult often, because sometimes some people think they're a bother. I say, no, I'm here because I want to hear from you, and I want to hear from you early. Another thing we've tried to do is beyond, besides, opening up a pathway for privacy review, we've got a pathway for privacy by design consultation. When you think about this thing, it doesn't have to be fully formed. You say, hey, I'm thinking about this, put it out there, and then we pick it up, set up a time, and have conversations around it. The beautiful thing with that process is it sort of wants to mirror the water cooler conversation, but it's a little bit different. And I say that because when I have a conversation with you in a meeting, I always say documentation is key. Have your documentation of the conversations that you've had. The reason I mentioned that is because the conversations, this consult can be ongoing. The ideas begin to form and take shape. However, the individual or the business partner coming to you is just one business partner. We context switch a lot in privacy engineering. So you may be talking this minute to the HR person, the next minute you're talking with the marketing person. You also need to think about experience fundamentally. When they come back in a month's time, they wouldn't want to reiterate all that they've said. They want you to be aware of where we left off, what decisions we made. And so all of that will go into your documentation. And just, in a sense, to bring an analogy here, is just think about when you go to the doctor's office. If you visited a doctor, before you get seen, you get a nurse who does the triage, and trust me, during that triage, they're already pinging the doctor and saying, hey, Amaka is here to visit. And the doctor is reading the notes, not because the doctor thought about you last night, but the doctor is reading all of those notes. And so as privacy engineers, we have to come, into this with an experience mindset, a user experience or a business partnership experience mindset. When they come in for a consultation, they feel heard, they feel seen, and we feel embedded in the process.
Thank you, Amaka. And
Sure.
my next question in line is, Steve. I will give you the ball, and I will actually give you the ball in a nice way. So like all these requires an excessive amount of communication and excessive amount of documentation with regard to tech stack and the operation compliance and data flows, etc. So like, what are the tools in the arsenal of a privacy engineer within your experience that you are using to really track everything that's going on? And Steve, like, would you like to add anything to that particular question? You're on mute.
The thing that came to my mind as Amaka was talking is, because you talk with a lot of different groups, I'm just wondering, are there patterns, communication patterns that you've noticed where when you're talking to a particular kind of group, this is the kind of approach, or this is the kind of documents that work best with communicating with them? Or and I'm very curious, because everybody speaks a different language, and that's one of the big challenges, because you're dealing with so many different parts of an organization. How do you work successfully with them? How do you become the kind of the intermediary, the translator for that?
I like that you asked that question, and I'll say one thing. When I did my master's, my dissertation was on boundary spanning, and that's what I do to today. As I integrate with different team, I always say when it comes to privacy, I'm an embedded privacy member of the team. I'm an embedded member, right? So that's how I think about it. And when I think about, the early engagement is when they're deciding on the approach, the quarterly planning. I want to be sitting in there. I want to understand where we're going, because that's where you pick up the language. That's where you pick up the goals, And so when we think about privacy, it's not necessarily from a compliance point of view. It's also looking at it, how can I help achieve the goals that they've set? And so in terms of communication, I say at the end of the day, it's about language. What language are we using? Are they looking to acquire more customers? What would that mean? And so when we go back to the threat modeling analogy is, there are 4 unique questions that we typically ask is, what are you working on? By being embedded, you already start understanding what we're working on and what, and then we get to what can go wrong. That is where the change begins to happen in the conversation. And in addressing what can go wrong, first of all, I like to say scoping, right? I'm not just going to say what can go wrong in the marketing department or what can go wrong in HR, is within these initiatives that you're doing, what can go wrong? And 2 ways I like to think about what can go wrong. What has gone wrong in the past is all over the news. You want to remind them of that. And then what are the frameworks that we know about that helps us begin to think about all of these things? And this is my sentiment. I always say that when people understand the threat, addressing the vulnerability in system design becomes easy. So that's, in terms of communication, a lot of analogy, and you cannot use the right analogy except you understand the team, you understand their goals. And so that's what really shapes the analogies I use, the stories I tell, the insights that I draw upon, and the frameworks that I rely on. So I wouldn't just walk in and say, hey, we're using Linden framework or we're using Plot for AI. But the questions I ask is actually gathered from all of those places, and it's right-sized for the audience.
And my question, with the follow-up actually to your response, Amaka, is again, like you're basing the scope on the context, but again, like having all these multidisciplinary stakeholders embedded, like you embedding yourself in their processes, like then like it's tenfold more documentation and threat models, etc., for like each person in each use case. So like again, what are some of the tips and trips that you use to really keep track of everything with regard to like those threat modeling phases, let's say?
So I always say that the right questions find the right person. Right. So, I mean, if we look at it theoretically, we think about bringing a ton of people into a room. In practice, that seldom happens. But if I have the right question, the question is, I need an answer to that question. Who can answer that question, and who can answer satisfactorily to the point that they could put their name behind, the answers that we receive? And so we're going to go find answers. And so that is where we begin to pull in relevant stakeholders into the room. However, when I'm writing a documentation, it's not a documentation that is a narrative of all that has been said. It's a documentation that is risk-oriented. Where are the threats? Do we understand it clearly? And it's not just understanding it for myself being a privacy engineer. Does the business understand the threat? I talked about what are we working on, what can go wrong. And then the next piece where we begin to see engagement is, what are we going to do about this, right? I can only propose recommendations, but I find that people become very creative in 2 scenarios. One is when there is a buy-in to the recommendation, they find creative ways to address it. Secondly, where there is no buy-in, they find creative ways to go around it. So the thing is, when we talk about what are we going to do about it, you want to be sure that they are sold, they understand what can go wrong. And this brings me back to my time being an ethical hacker. When I'm talking about what can go wrong, I'm really telling you this is how far I can go. And I know you talked to Rebecca on the red team, right? This is how far an attacker can go, and this is the harm that it can cause. So these are practical and not so much theoretical. And I say that privacy harms, they're no longer hypothetical. They are real. We see them, everywhere around us. And so pulling all of these together and say, hey, what are we going to do about it? And that question, if we take a step back, that question is really impactful during early engagement. If someone has thrown their weight behind developing an application, and at the time of go live, you're telling them we need to rework it, they're going to find a way to defend. They're going to find a way to, fight through and just make it go. But if it's early on, we could start reworking, we could start redesigning. And that's where the beauty of early engagement comes in, what can go wrong. And maybe just a way to wrap up with the fourth question when we talk about threat modeling, because in all that we do, it's really around threat modeling and ensuring that we have a very robust system. They do a good enough job. And that's where the red team has come in. However, I say, when I design, I always say, I don't want the users to tell me if we did a good job. It's, I want to find out internally, did we do a good job? We want the users to give us thumbs up, but not letting us know where the gaps are. So we constantly want to iterate on asking those questions and also look at the threat landscape. How is it evolving? What are we hearing? Like when there's a breach out there, you're interested because number one is what controls failed, and how far did they get? And so how can I take that learning to review, the designs that I've approved or that I'm currently approving?
Thank you so much, Amaka. And
Sure.
a follow-up again to your last response. With regard to threat modeling, so again, how much of it is automated based on your workflows and your past experiences? Like, because there are like automated things that do it on like DevOps cycle as well, and there are like more form-like and human-oriented. And like, what's your take and experience around like threat modeling, and for those who are wanting to get into these approaches?
So there are two ways, especially when I know security is really deep when it comes to threat modeling and having those tools and framework. One of the ways that I find helpful is in collaborating with security. When they're asking those questions, you want to be sure that at that same time, we are going in the room together. So for example, if we have someone who can answer a combined question, I wouldn't want to have multiple sessions. So whatever tools you have in your organization, and in most organizations, there are no tools. It's just it's dependent on how vast or how knowledgeable the privacy engineer is. And that's why this framework is very important to standardize the process, to ensure, to give us assurance that we've gone through a list of threats that are known, and how are we addressing it. So that's where the framework comes in to really standardize. Of course, the more experience you have, the more color you can bring into the process, the more convincing you can be, because sometimes you tell them, let's do this. The question is, why are we doing it? And so we need to answer those questions, from a risk based perspective. So I am, and personally, I'm not really hung up on tools. I'm very heavy on process. And I say tools should follow process. And that's been my go-to. But as long as you engage early, secondly, you engage collaboratively. If security is doing, threat modeling, you don't want to have another session for privacy. You probably want to sit in the room and say, hey, these are the questions you're asking. These are my addendum from privacy. And most times security might have answered some of the questions with regards to, privacy threats, because of course, you cannot have privacy without security. So, having both of them as a handshake, but understanding that if I sit in the room for privacy threat modeling, these are my interests. Am I advocating for the users? Am I advocating for the changing context of the users? How are we giving the users control? And, those are those key questions we begin to ask when we sit in the room. And sometimes the threat actors for security may be the same with the threat actors for privacy, but there are other times that they may be separate, because when security thinks about protecting the fortress, protecting us from external attacks, we might double down to say, how about internal attacks? When we have these data points within the organization, who can access it, why are they accessing it, and in what form are they accessing it, and when do they get to access it? Those are questions we begin to ask. Like, for example, when I worked at a bank, there are certain customers we call HNIs, high network individuals. A bank teller sitting somewhere cannot just go and check their balance because they've been put in a segment. The question I started asking myself is, why won't a regular person on the street decide, hey, I don't want my account to be accessed? So those should be controls that should be baked in for everyone, and not just for a segment because they're celebrities or high network. I mean, there are times we need to respect those contexts, but at the same time, we also need to think about, making these controls available for most people because their context changes.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Amaka. Any questions from the audience or not? I have one more. And Steve, yeah, I think you're approaching the mic.
Well, I don't necessarily have a specific question. I mean, your comment about, your focus is on threat modeling, and I certainly understand that. And process and tools. I just come back to do you find that depending on the group that you're talking to, that your approach to process is different? You want to be in the room. And if there's many different groups in the same room versus if you're one-on-one with just developers, or you're one-on-one with just the lawyers or other groups, do you find that your approach shifts emphasis, or you change your vocabulary or anything like that when you're to how you interact with these various stakeholders?
Absolutely. The answer is yes. The vocabulary changes, the mannerism changes, and this is me. I love to have one-on-one because that's where we go deep. Most times when we bring in, and that's one of the stage setting for threat modeling. It's like everybody comes into the room and we do this, but sometimes you could find that you're losing some people. And I also want to respect people's time. So when we get, level of understanding from different folks, go into the room with the lawyers, go into the room with HR, it could be painstaking, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in that manner of setting multiple times. I started off by saying the right questions will bring the right people, all right? So once you have that question, the question is, who is the right person to answer? And so we get into the room and we begin to use that vocabulary, one, from their actual context, and two, is also stating it from what can go wrong and what might that mean for them, and how will that challenge the goals that they've set for themselves. So that's where I begin to use, if I don't know their goals, I cannot use the right analogies with them. And goals are always in tension. Sometimes sales has different goals from marketing, and if you're in a room, you're just going to get tripped. So the most important thing is sit down with your goals, sit down with how can we achieve privacy objectives, maintaining privacy properties within whatever set of assets that you're looking to defend. And so that would be my approach is, look, we're always context switching, we're always boundary spanning, because there was a time I worked and someone mistook me for a lawyer just because I've been in the room with the lawyers for too long. That is bound to happen. So you have to constantly redefine yourself. Hey, my name is Amaka. I'm a privacy engineer, but I work with everybody who touches on data. So yes, Steve, I would say the language keeps changing. It could be a lot, but I think it's fun. And if you have fun doing it, this is a place for you. Yeah.
One last question on my side, but
Mhm.
please, Bindia, Mejit, join in to the conversation. Cephas, I was wondering, like, again, security has their like own approaches, going way back than the privacy threat modeling and asking those four questions. And based on that, your experience with regard to the duration of like a threat model with regard to privacy that you're doing, either with the same forms with the security team or either in the same settings. But considering your experiences, like where we at with the privacy threat modeling on the same scope, same system, how does it take for the security to complete their task, and how does the privacy and those security teams having the background early on, is it something that expedite their process? Is that the experience that you came across?
From my experience, if I have to review, I usually say I typically don't, especially if it's of course we need to also calibrate what type of system are we looking at. And so if it's a more complex system, typically wouldn't even go in without security, having gone in or collaborative directly with security folks. So it's more of an add-on, because when you look at privacy principles, there are areas for security, right? Even privacy by design, it says end-to-end security. So it means you should have done your due diligence from a security point of view. If you miss security and, because I say consult early, consult often, you're coming to me, I will spot it. I'm like, where's the security review on this, right? And so it's usually an add-on that there's going to be deep dive from a security point of view. However, this is a scenario where we could go first before security. Is overall looking at the design, like when you consult early and you're saying, hey, this is a design, and I'm like, hey, think about this that can go wrong. Think about it from this category of users. Are we looking at a vulnerable population? Why are you collecting this level of data? What are we going to do with this level of data? What if we do not collect it? So that can also alter your approach. But in terms of the robustness from a security point of view, we want security to do their due diligence, and we also do our due diligence. And I say security will look at the system. We're also looking at the system, but at the same time, looking at the interaction with the users and what can go wrong from that point of view.
Thank you, Amaka, so much. And
Sure.
we have one question, which I'm going to read for you. Bindia asked, yeah, her mic doesn't work, so I'll help you, Bindia. She said, I'm trying to work with security to incorporate privacy threat modeling into their framework, but it doesn't work. Areas risk, their tool, isn't adaptable to our frameworks, and security's focus is on data protection and not on individual rights. Did this something you have been dealing with?
So if it doesn't work, if you haven't gotten to that place, remember, like Steve had said, the way that I talk to my security folks is also different from, and for me, it's an advantage because I've been in security, right? So I could really wear the security hat at any time. See, however, if it doesn't work in terms of collaborating at the same time, you could let security take a pass and then you take a pass. Or you could do your review and leave the open areas where you think security will address. And so once they're done with you refer back, you do a reference to the security, and then you could also let the security folks know, hey, I've done, but this is something I want to get an input on based on your assessment. And most times when it doesn't work from a security point of view, it could make or break the release process for the application. So don't get overly hung up about embedding it into their system if it's not working. Or although I know that OAPS has, I think it's the Threat Dragon, where you could use it as a collaborative tool, but not all organizations usually leverage these tools. Have the right question and ensure that you find answers to that. And over time, we could use tools to really operationalize the very work that you've been doing, the very essence that you've been driving.
like Epistemis Steve's working on. Steve, would you like to give a couple sentences about how you are solving these and touching upon those?
Well, the key focus of the tooling I'm developing is on modeling the data at a conceptual level, the data and the data flows that organizations that are embedded in a particular product that an organization is developing, or whatever tools, and then evaluating those against a set of rules. Those rules could be regulations, GDPR, CCPA, those kind of things. They could be against threat model, threat models in terms of here's the kinds of rules we know that indicate there's a particular privacy threat or stuff like that. I haven't done anything on the threat modeling side yet, just because I'm bandwidth limited. Okay.
It's a lot.
Yeah. The stuff that I'm working on right now, I've got a portion of GDPR, and then I'm just getting the foundational part with the modeling, both the data flows and the data modeling in place. So I'm always looking for people to try it out and give me feedback, tell me, here's something I want, add this, add that. So, I'd be very interested to get feedback from you, Amaka, or anybody else saying, this is the kind of thing I want in this tool. That's very valuable. I'm very interested in that. So
I'm sharing this link on the chat, and also Amaka, your podcast, I think I have it on my browser, but I think I got this. This is the link, right, Amaka? Yeah. And for Epistemis and what Steve is building, you could always check out from this link. Just a second. Yep. Nope, I didn't copy it. Oops. And yeah, for Privacy Quest Village, you know where to find us. And thank you for finding us here at this particular event. Amaka, it's been a pleasure knowing you, and I'll definitely listen to podcast and let you know what I think about it. And really glad that everyone is here. Mejit, thank you for being in the organization committee and helping me out with everything so far. And Bindia, thank you for the question. And Cephas for, again, really, you're one of the people who I really enjoy talking, because you, your efforts you put in Privacy Quest platform with the puzzles and everything, and making this particular event real. I really appreciate it, and thank you so much for being here as well. And
yeah, I put the link to the podcast in there, and I'm happy to continue this conversation. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. Let's just continue this conversation and see where this takes us to.
All right.
cool.
Then greetings again, and goodbye from Privacy Quest Village, and happy Data Privacy Day, everyone. Goodbye.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye.